If you are a band or music producer and you are thinking about buying new microphones, but you are overwhelmed by the endless possibilities ranging from fairly cheap microphones to really expensive microphones, then you are at the right place. Hi, I'm Stefan from Mix66, and in this video I will compare the Sony Singstar microphone, so a cheap microphone which was designed to play video games with, not even to record music with some industry standards like the Audix i5. I will do this by recording myself on the drum kit. I will put all the microphones at the same time, so we'll hear the exact same performance with two different microphones. To further enhance the difference between the cheap and the more expensive solution, I will use the Behringer XR digital mixer to record the cheap solution. The Behringer XR18 is a 18-channel digital mixer with 16 preamps that costs around $500, but you have also outputs, a mixer included, a Wi-Fi router included, so many more functionalities. So if we break it down, the cost per one single preamplifier will be around $10–20, I don't know. So it's really cheap. And for the expensive solution, I will use the Audient ASP800, a mic preamp with only 8 channels that alone costs $600. And you also need a converter for that. For that I will use a RME converter, again $500. So just interface wise, we will compare a $500 solution to a $1,200 solution. Now let's talk about the microphones. For the expensive solution, I will use two microphones on kick and on snare. For the kick drum, I will use a Shure Beta91A inside the kick drum and a Sennheiser MD421 on the outside. For the snare, I will use a Audix i5 on top and a biodynamic TG D57 on the bottom. For the floor mic, I will use a Audix D-Series and as overheads a pair of T-Bone RB500 ribbon microphones. All these microphones together cost about $1,400. So the total of the expensive solution, including microphones, preamplifier and interface, would be around $2,600. For the cheap solution, I cannot tell you any price for the Singstar microphones because they were included in a video game, but let's say €5 per microphone. I will use 5 of them, one on kick, one on snare, one on floor tom, 2 overheads, so 5 times 5 is 25, and 500 for the Behringer XR18, which has the preamps and the interface included, so we have a total of $525. Now enough of talking and let's listen to both microphone setups. Then we will also take a look if we can process the cheaper solution to make it sound like the more expensive solution. Okay, so here we have the recording of the drums. You can also see me playing the drums. And we have one follow track in Reaper with the more expensive solution and another one with the Singstar configuration. So these are the raw recordings, normalized, but with no further processing. The only processing that is active right now is a clipper on the output, and this is just so that I don't overload the output. So let's listen to the more expensive solution. You can see that 2 tracks are muted. This is because I've used a kick-in and a snare bottom mic for the more expensive solution. But when I used the Singstar microphones, I didn't use these 2 microphones, so I decided to mute them for now so that we have a better comparison between the 2 setups. Okay, and now let's listen to the Singstar microphones. Also here there is no processing. Every track is just normalized and also the tom and the overheads are panned. Now let's listen once again and I will switch back and forth between the 2 microphone configurations. Okay, and now let's compare every single microphone. Let's start with the bass drum. where we have a Sennheiser MD421 against the Singstar microphone. Both microphones were placed just outside the kick drum in front of the porthole. We have a nice kick drum sound, the mids are not too scooped, and we have a nice clicky attack. The attack is not as high as with modern microphones like the Audix D-Series. It is a little bit deeper, around 2 to 3, 4K in that area, while more modern microphones hype more the 5 to 10K region in kick drums. Now let's compare it to the Singstar microphone. Now we can immediately hear that the Singstar microphone has less bass, but it has a really nice click to it. Especially for some vintage rock, this could be an awesome additional microphone, but to use it as a single microphone, it may lack a bit of bass. But as an additional microphone, this could work great. Let's try that just for fun. So I will unmute the Singstar microphone and add a low cut on the Singstar microphone. And now let's listen to both microphones together. But now let's open an analyzer and also take a look at the differences between the two microphones. I will put FabFilter Pro Q3 on both tracks. This was the MD421 and here we have the Singstar. And here's a little tip with FabFilter Pro Q3. If you click down here on Analyzer, you can see now the other instances of FabFilter Pro Q3, which I previously named Singstar Kick. And if I click now on this instance, we see both analyzer curves in here. The red is the Singstar microphone and the white is the Sennheiser MD421. You can see that the Singstar has more of the really low, so the sub bass, but around 100 Hz we have much more energy in the Sennheiser. Here the mid region is fairly the same, and here in the region from 2 to 7K we can see why the Singstar microphone has such a nice attack to it, because it has much more energy in this upper mid range. If we take a look at the very highs, we can see that the Singstar falls off very quick, while the Sennheiser has a more even high-end response. And now let's try to EQ match both microphones. So we will try to match the sound of the Singstar to the sound of the Sennheiser. For that I will open the Pro Q3 instance, which is loaded on the Singstar track. Also here on the analyzer we will select the MD421, and now if we play it, we can click EQ match and Pro Q3 will match the frequency response from the Singstar microphone to the response from the Sennheiser. Okay, and now let's compare, and now let's listen to the result. Compare it to the real Sennheiser microphone. To the original sound of the Singstar. And now we will listen to the Singstar microphone and I will switch the EQ match off and on. As you can hear, by using EQ, we can get this cheap microphone closer to the sound of a more expensive microphone. Of course, it is not exactly the same, and also phase-wise, doing such drastic EQ moves is not the best thing, but if it sounds better, then go for it. Now let's compare the snare drum. Same again, first the Audix i5 and then the Singstar. Also here we hear that the raw signal from the i5 is much better. It sounds much more present, has more punch to it. But again, let's insert Pro Q3 on both tracks. Let's name this one i5 and this one is Singstar snare. First of all, we'll take a look at the difference between the two signals. Now here we can see two things. The first one is why the Singstar microphone sounds so dull, because it has less upper mid-range and even less highs. And if we compare it to the results of the kick drum, we can see that the difference in the high end is much bigger. Now this could be because of two things. First, because the Audix i5, which we are comparing the Singstar microphone against on the snare drum, has more high end than the Sennheiser on the kick drum. But it also could mean that the Singstar microphones don't have the same frequency response. It could be that the one on kick drum has a little bit more high end and the one on the snare drum has less high end. I think Sony didn't put that much energy, or in other words money, into the quality control of these cheap microphones because they thought, well, it should work to play a video game, but not to record with them in a studio situation. And now again, let's try to EQ match them. Select the i5, EQ match, reference is our external i5. Okay, now let's solo the Singstar microphone. Compare it to the i5. Now the i5 still sounds a little bit crispier. This could be because the capsule from the microphone itself is faster, so we have a better transit response on the i5. I'm pretty sure that that's the reason. But again, with EQ, we can get the sound of the cheap microphone pretty close to the more expensive microphone solution. Let's move on to toms, or in this case there is just one tom. There I have the Audix D-Series microphone, which is basically a kick drum microphone, which is heavily EQ'd. It is very scooped with lots of lows, almost no mids, and again a hyped high frequency response. So let's listen to the D-Series on the floor tom. I mean, this is basically a mix ready floor tom sound. Very scooped, but I really like it. And now let's listen to the Singstar microphone. I mean, that's a huge difference. Now, if you compare these two recordings, as I said, these are unprocessed recordings. One with a great microphone through a great preamp, the other recording with a cheap microphone through a cheap preamp. We can hear how important the recording equipment is. The signal from the Singstar sounds like another instrument or even like a broken microphone. But let's try again to EQ match both signals. So Pro Q3 on both tracks, D6, and this is the Singstar floor tom. And now let's try to EQ match them. Okay, so basically this here, what you can see here, is the difference between the two microphones. The Audix D6 has 20 dB more of low end and even 30 dB more of high end and 10 dB less mid-range. Now let's listen to the EQ match signal from the Singstar microphone. Without the EQ match, with the EQ match. I mean, unbelievable what you can do with EQ match. And now let's compare this heavily EQ'd signal from the Singstar microphone with the raw sound from the Audix D6. Again, as in the examples before, these are not exactly the same signals, but they are pretty close. And now let's move on to overheads. For that, I will group them together. So this is overhead T-Bone and overhead Singstar. Now I must admit that the T-Bone overheads are not the best or the most expensive overhead microphones that you can buy, but I really like them on overheads because they are ribbon microphones and they don't have these harsh condenser highs, but a more smooth top end response. Now let's compare the two signals. First we listen to the T-Bone overheads. And now to the Singstar overheads. Also here we can hear the lack of low end and high end in the Singstar microphones. The T-Bone overhead microphones gives us a much better overall picture of the drum kit. The Singstar microphones almost sound like they are outside the room or something. And now we'll try to EQ match also these microphones. Now we can also see what we had heard. Singstar microphones are lacking bass and highs. Now let's listen to the EQ matched signal. The raw Singstar sound. Now let's compare the EQ matched signal from the Singstar microphones to the raw sound of the T-Bone microphones. On the overheads you can hear that even with EQ match the difference between the T-Bone microphones and the Singstar microphones is bigger. I guess this is because I EQ matched both overhead signals, so the left and the right, so the stereo signal, and not each individual mono track. I guess if I would EQ match the left T-Bone overhead with the left Singstar overhead, the sound would be closer. So let's try and do that. I will get rid of the bus processing on the overheads and add Pro Q3 on the individual tracks. Okay, and now I will match the left Singstar overhead to the left T-Bone and the right Singstar to the right T-Bone. Let's compare them once again. Now again, this is not as close as the previous examples were, but we will live with that. And now let's compare the raw, expensive solution to the EQ matched Singstar microphone solution. For that I need to copy these EQ settings down here where I have the whole Singstar setup. Now let's listen to the whole drum kit with the EQ matched Singstar microphones. now the more expensive microphone solution. What you can hear is that there is some punch missing in the Singstar setup, and I can also explain you why that is the case. It is because of the drastic EQ moves. Because I recorded the drums so that the microphones were more or less in phase. But then if you go on and make such drastic EQ moves, you completely mess up the phase response of every single microphone. If we record a single instrument with multiple microphones, so in our case a drum kit which is a single instrument in some way with 5 microphones, and the raw recordings of the microphones are in phase, but then we mangle the phase response of every single track by such drastic EQ moves, we end up with this mix that has lost a lot of punch. And that is also the reason why the single cheap microphones don't sound too bad by themselves if we EQ match them to the more expensive microphone solution, but I would not recommend to go for the cheapest solution. I mean, it is great to get started, to make your first recordings. Don't worry about equipment, just use whatever is affordable to you or that you have access to, and don't stress too much about it. You can get great results even with cheap microphones, but there is a reason why all the pros use much more expensive equipment. It is not only because of prestige or because they have the money to buy expensive microphones. No, it is because normally these microphones also sound better. But please, never ever let equipment holding you back. And to demonstrate that, I will now make a rough mix with both microphone setups. Because remember, the comparison that you've heard now was just the raw signals of the expensive microphone solution compared to EQ matched cheaper microphones, but with absolutely no additional processing. So maybe we can get the cheap microphone solution sound better by making some additional processing. Maybe even flipping some of the phases may help a lot. So now I will mix both microphone setups. I will fast forward to the results because I think I have enough drum mixing videos on YouTube. So if you want to learn more about how I mix the drums, check out my channel and you will find quite a lot of videos about drum mixing. First, the more expensive setup. And now the Singstar setup. Now let's switch between them. The more expensive solution just sounds better and more expensive. Of course, I have done these mixes now very fast, and if I would invest more time into them, I could get them to sound even better. Also, the ones that were done with the Singstar microphone. But usually, with good recordings, you get also great sounding mixes pretty fast. And also this shows that the Singstar microphones aren't quite on the level of some more expensive microphones. So there you have it. This was my comparison between a fairly cheap solution to record drums and one that costs a little bit more. Now it's up to you to decide which one is better for you. And if you are going to record your own drums, whether with a cheap or a more expensive solution, I have a special offer for you. If you want to download my free drum samples, by the way, these were recorded with high quality gear in a great sounding live room, then just click the link in the description and you can download my drum samples for free. As always, thank you for watching. If you want to see more videos about music production and audio engineering, then please subscribe to this channel. See you next time. Bye.